Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery, bringing you another bow review for 2025. Last year there was one bow that came out, effectively a brand new platform for that manufacturer, and really set the archery world on fire. It was easily our most viewed review that we had done last year. This year, the folks over at Mathews, by way of the LIFT X33, have taken that already very successful platform and have introduced a host of new features, meaning that you can do more adjustment at home and fine-tune this bow to your shooting preferences. I cannot wait to get this thing in for review and test. Let's get into it. All right, we are back in studio today with the LIFT X33 from the folks over at Mathews, an extension, an update rather, to their very successful lift platform that they had developed and delivered to us last year. This bow is a 33-inch axle-to-axle platform boasting a brace height of 6.5 inches. It is completely machined out of aluminum using a 6-axis process that allows them to deliver what they are claiming is a 4.26 pound system. It does have an IBO speed rating of 343 feet per second, accommodating draw lengths from 26 out to 31.5 inches, and all of that coming to you for $1,469. Before we dive in and actually begin examining the specifications of this particular factory fresh bow, I'd be remiss not to stop and give a quick shout out and thank you to Bear Creek Archery in Inglewood, Colorado, the de facto sponsor of this channel. They happen to be a multi-generational family shop that I trust for all of my archery needs. They're also loaning us all of the bows that we have, and without their support, this channel would not be possible. If you are in the Front Range in Colorado or passing through, please go visit my friends over at Bear Creek Archery. All right, let's dig in and begin examining the specifications for this particular bow. We're going to start by validating that axle to axle measurement. So if we do go from the center of this axle to the same on the other side, this one is coming in just a little bit long at 33 1/8 of an inch. So just a little bit longer than advertised there. Next, let's go ahead and look into the brace height. That going from the center of the string here to the deepest part of the throat of the grip. And on this particular bow, that is coming in at exactly 6.5 inches. The next thing that we want to look into is the overall riser dimension. Remember, I really like a longer riser, especially relative to the axle-to-axle measurement, thinking again of the riser itself as providing me a lot of stability when I am at full draw and really kind of on my shot. So we can go ahead and find the natural pivot point of the bow, which again is the last point that the riser and limb assembly is actually kind of supported there. And that is coming in at exactly 33.5 inches. That gives us a riser to axle ratio of 101.1%. So this is a case where the riser itself is actually longer than the axle to axle measurement for the bow. We can use that exact same pivot point to also identify the reflex, that is the measurement from that natural pivot point to the actual pivot point or the deepest part of the throat of the grip there. And on this bow with that factory grip installed, it is coming in at 1 3/4 of an inch. So relatively short for longer axle-to-axle hunting bows. Next, let's go ahead and look into the weight. Remember, they are claiming again that through that 6-axis machining, they can skeletonize this riser down to the point where they can actually deliver all of that capability and that longer riser, all for 4.26 pounds. This is completely stripped down other than a D-loop, no modifications out of the box. Putting it on our hand scale here. That is coming in at 4.42 pounds, 4.42. So just a little bit above what they are advertising, but still a remarkably light bow, again, considering that longer riser that you are getting out of the system. Last but not least, let's look into that limb stance. A lot of engineers claiming that the wider that overall limb stance, the more secure the axle and the lever there at the back as far as stability when you are at full draw. So using our calipers here to measure, this is coming in at 2 7/8 of an inch. So, relatively middle of the road compared to most of the bows that we've had in for testing so far this year. All right, with this bow verified, let me go ahead and put a rest on this guy. Meet me out on the range where I will give you my very first shooting impressions. All right, we are stepping out on the range now with that LIFT X33 from Mathews, an extension by way of some new features to that very successful LIFT 33 platform that they had released last year as kind of a wholesale update to their line of hunting bows. Very excited to run a few arrows through this guy and give you my very first shooting impressions. We do have this dialed now to exactly 70 pounds of peak weight by way of a 70-pound mod with an 85% let-off, because that is what we had available for this first review. Let's see how it shoots. That draw cycle I would describe as relatively smooth. Feels really nice to draw, very easy to do smoothly. Very useful string angle, easy to find the reference points by way of, for me, that nose when I am at anchor. Almost no vibration coming through that actual riser, despite the fact that other than the limbs, that resistance phase dampening, there aren't any vibration dampening aspects to the actual riser itself, and very dead in the hand. By that I mean very little forward movement on the shot itself. Yeah, really easy and smooth to draw, especially for a bow with that speed rating. Very solid back wall. I mean, putting in a lot of pressure, you can get a little bit out of it, but there's almost no sponge in that back wall. The bow itself actually sounds relatively quiet to me, to be expected. Again, they are saying that resistance phase dampening in the limbs itself said to kill a lot of sound on the shot right there at the actual limb architecture of the bow. Be very curious to see how this thing comes through when we do our decibel meter rating here in a little bit. And so they have come out with new kind of modular grip system for this year. I will say that the grip that comes on it right out of the box, I don't prefer. It still has like kind of a rounded profile with a little bit of texturing there on the back, but you can easily swap that out. And yeah, just remarkably kind of dead in the hand with absolutely no felt shot vibration. All in an extension of the already very impressive platform from Mathews. Let's take this bow inside now and get it on the draw board and the dyno to take a look at some of the dynamic specifications. All right, we are back inside with the LIFT X33 now pulled into our full draw position to get a sense for some of the dynamic specifications that helps to explain the shooting impressions that we're getting out on the range. The first thing that I do like to measure on a lot of these bows is what is the actual string to string measurement. That is the last point that the string is really kind of supported and applying force into the cam channel there to the corresponding spot on the other side of the cam. On this particular bow, that is coming in at 33 3/4 of an inch. We can use that same kind of vertical reference point to come up with what is effectively new for us this year, and that is a measurement of the dynamic brace height. That is what is effectively the lever arm, where the force at the back of the bow when you are at full draw may be helping to actually resist torque at the grip itself. Many different engineers from various companies are claiming that if you can preserve or even extend that dynamic brace height, you may be able to resist more grip torque applied to the system. On this particular bow, it is actually shrinking, so it's going from about 6.5 inches when static to 5.25 inches when in that full draw position. Next, let's take a look at our updated axle to axle measurement. That is coming in at 29 3/4 of an inch by way of 3 3/8 of an inch of total limb deflection in the system. As you can see there, the axles are going from about parallel to that riser design to well within that riser design when we are at full draw. Next, let's move to the front of the bow and take a look and verify our actual draw length. This does have, as we had mentioned before, 30-inch and 85% let-off mods. That is what we had available for filming. And this is coming in just a little bit long at 30 1/4 inches, giving us a total power stroke out of the system of 22 inches. Next, let's take a look at the draw force curve for this bow. As we can see, despite having a relatively kind of aggressive cam profile, I think that combined with a huge amount of limb deflection is giving us an overall a very kind of smooth drawing bow. And again, I think that that's really explained in the draw force curve itself. As we can see, it stacks in a very linear, kind of even fashion, reaching peak weight just a little bit beyond that 25% mark. Then it holds that weight very steadily and consistently until about the halfway point, where we see a very gradual taper to the 75% mark before ultimately kind of letting off into the valley. The actual holding weight on this bow, again with those 85% let-off mods, is 11.4 pounds, giving us an actual hold off when this thing is dialed into 70 pounds of 83.7%. Next, let's take a look at the area under the curve for that draw force analysis. We are coming up with 1,213.7 inch-pounds, or the accumulated total energy required by the archer to get through that draw cycle, and then stored to be returned into the arrow to generate those speeds that they are claiming. That's coming in pretty middle of the pack relative to a lot of the bows that we've had on test so far this year, and yet Mathews is claiming an IBO speed of 343 feet per second. Ultimately, this limb cam system is going to need to be very efficient if you're going to expect to get speeds anywhere close to that 343 claimed speed rating. Speaking of which, meet me out on the range where we will get our weighted arrows and actually begin to do some speed analysis for this bow. All right, we are stepping back out on the range now with the LIFT X33 set to exact ATA specification. So this bow is pulling exactly 69.95 pounds. This is as close as I could get it to that exact 70 mark. It does have 85% by way of the let-off for the mods that we had available for that 30-inch draw position. Ready to run several weighted arrows through this guy to see what kind of speeds we get. This first arrow is that ATA spec testing arrow. It comes in at exactly 350 grains. That arrow going 330.8 feet per second. Next up is our 400 grain arrow. That going 319.3 feet per second. And last but not least is our 450 grain arrow. That going 292.8 feet per second. All in, those are very good speeds, although below the IBO spec that Mathews is advertising by way of that 343. But again, for how easy this bow is to draw and the amount of energy stored in that draw force curve, those are really very good speeds. All right, we are back inside with the LIFT X33 from the folks over at Mathews, getting very good speed performance out of this particular platform this year. As is always the case, we like to shoot a lot of 350 grain arrows out of the platform to get a really nice tight average. And on this particular bow, it is coming in at 329.4 feet per second. So that will be our official speed rating for this bow, again with those 85% let-off mods. You also notice that we got a little bit of a flyer there with the 400 grain arrow. It was going 319 feet per second. We actually thought that that might be a little bit high, so I shot a series of 400 grain arrows. We were actually getting a much better average, closer to 309 feet per second. So I think that that's what you should target by way of speed, again, if you are shooting a 400 grain arrow at 30 inches of draw and 70 pounds of peak weight out of this platform. Now let's begin to talk about some of the specifics and really the engine, that is the cam system of the bow itself. So they are carrying forward with something that they had kind of pioneered, which is individual mods to affect 3 different parameters of the bow. The first thing you can do with those mods is actually change the peak weight from 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, and even 80 pounds. Again, just with those mods, with the same limb and riser configuration that you have coming with your bow. You can also affect the draw length from 26 out to 31.5 inches in half-inch increments, and the let-off. So we can actually get this in 80 and 85% options across all of those different mod variants. Really a very cool system, said to eke out a huge amount of efficiency at each individual kind of parameter permutation, if you will, across those different mods. And again, reflected in the speeds that we're getting relative to the draw force curve that we had analyzed earlier. Now let's dive into some of the specifics and some of what's changed for this year. So they are carrying forward with those switch weight X cams, and last year they had moved to a new axle assembly that actually moved the axle out here to this machined aluminum part that floated it above the limb and not actually doing it through the limb itself. They had said last year that that was in service of a little bit more like limb surface area to increase efficiency, but I think that one of the real reasons they had done that is because they were planning to implement what they've done this year, which is this limb shift technology. Limb shift means that the cam itself is actually slaved. It looks like they're to the left-hand side of the bow, but then you can actually change the wheeling and tuning of the bow by shifting one of the limbs on that actual axle assembly without the need for a bow press. So a very cool system on both the top and the bottom cam there that allows you to clean up all of your tuning concerns with these bows at home, at the paper tuner, and without the need for a bow press. That is really kind of one of the marquee innovations for this particular platform this year. They are also carrying forward with what they are calling their resistance phase dampening. So that effectively means that the top and bottom limbs are comprised of a set of 4 limbs, and each of those 2 limbs is supported by a piece of elastomer there in the middle. That again said to really kill vibration in the system as well as overall volume right there as energy is being transmitted from the cam, cables, string, etc. into the actual riser itself. I will say I think it's remarkably effective. This bow does not really have much else other than maybe this little vibration dampener here in the front that's going to help very much with vibration, and yet it is remarkably dead in the hand. Again, it is also said to kill the overall volume of the shot. So as is always the case, we took this thing outside. We did place our directional decibel meter exactly 3 feet from the horizontal shooting surface of the bow itself, running a 400 grain arrow at that ATA spec, and we did get 76.7 decibels. Easily the quietest bow that we've had in for testing so far this year. Again, that's something that we had noted from this particular bow and system last year as well. The Lift last year was also the quietest bow that we had added in for testing. I should also mention that they are carrying forward with a new limb manufacturing. They have what they are calling their Arc 7. So a new manufacturing and layup procedure to develop those limbs, said to be significantly more efficient and more durable over the life of the bow. Next, let's talk about some of the features of the riser itself, and we will start by talking about the sight mounting interfaces. There are really 2 options for you on this particular bow. As you can see, this is threaded here in the back where you can attach a traditional slider sight interface, allowing you to run that traditional kind of dovetail slider on the back of the actual riser itself. And then they are carrying forward with what they have called for years now bridge lock. So a specially designed slider that actually inserts right there into the actual center of the riser, allowing you again to kind of centralize the mass, similar to the Picatinny designs that we're seeing from a lot of the other manufacturers. So carrying forward with that. They're also extending that exact same capability into the stabilizers as well. So they have a traditional stabilizer hole here, and then another one on the back for your back bar, but then just below it they do have the interface where you can actually run the bridge lock style stabilizers. So a really cool system, allowing you again easy mounting options for both sights and the actual stabilizer bars. Makes it really easy to disassemble, and again proprietary to the folks over at Mathews. As far as the rest mounting interfaces, they do have this tapped for a single burger hole here in the back, so any traditional sight should mount to that. And then, like most manufacturers, they have installed this dovetail here with a little center mounting knock engineered right there into the actual riser itself. So any of the integrate style rests on the market will fit up to this thing incredibly nicely, creating that nice snug interface between the actual riser and your rest mount. Next, they are carrying forward with their center guard cable containment system. So what they've done here is they've actually put the lever here that supports the roller guards. They've put it really at an angle so that the actual cable containment system is right there in the center of the arrow. What that does is it creates the most vane clearance possible as your arrow is passing right past those cables and strings. It's also said to increase the efficiency of the system because now you have incredibly even tension on your top and bottom cable set. So carrying forward with that as well. Next, let's talk about grips, because that is something that Mathews has really worked on this year. They have their new Bond grip system. So that is a series of 3 different ergonomic style grips that will really just kind of clip directly onto the actual riser itself. So if you do prefer that insulated or ergonomic style grip, they have 3 different options for you that you can get at your local dealer, try out for yourself, and just attach right there to the riser. And then, as always the case, they do make the Bond style side plates as well. You also notice they are carrying forward, and you can see the little decal here, that this is shot sense compatible. So they do have a little kind of computer system that can actually go and mount directly underneath your grip and into the riser there, that is going to do all sorts of performance and shot analysis as you're shooting your bow, if you want to go for that option. As it relates to the string and cable set, they had moved last year to their match bowstrings. Those are a brand new process for them as of last year. They've proved to be remarkably durable. I had mentioned I'm actually running the LIFT 33 from last year as the bow that I was shooting. I have now thousands of arrows through the match strings that came on my particular setup, and they've held up incredibly well. In fact, I'm still shooting the original set that had come with my bow last year, which I think I had taken delivery of sometime in February. So those have held up incredibly nicely so far. One of the last features that I would talk about as it relates to the overall Mathews design is their limb legs. So because this is a lift bow, they are carrying forward. You can use the Engage EXO limb legs here. Those do just kind of slide very neatly right into the limb pocket assembly at the bottom of the bow, and allows you to set that bow up without any part of the actual bow, riser, cam system, etc. actually touching the ground. So really a very elegant system from the folks over at Mathews. It's one of my favorite systems as it relates to overall kind of like limb legs and an option to set down your bow. So that is our all-in review for the LIFT X 33 for 2025, all coming to you for $1,469. If you like this review, please hit the subscribe button, join us over on Instagram, and join us for more of these reviews. I'm going to continue with a whole series here where we are looking at all of the flagship longer axle-to-axle bows. We're going to take all the metrics and the way that we measure and analyze these bows and begin to compare those at the end to determine what we think is the best bow for 2025. I hope you'll join us on the next one.